Toronto. This is John Kyo, and welcome to episode number 8 of the Future of Food 10 by 10 series, where I talk to 10 CEOs for 10 minutes to get their perspectives on what's happening in the food industry and how their companies or organizations are addressing those. And I'm delighted to have with me today, all the way from Singapore, Matt Kovac, the CEO of Food Industry Asia. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, John.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing?
Fantastic, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to put you on the spot straight away, Matt, if you don't mind, and ask you in 1 minute, can you give us a little bit of an overview of who you are and also the elevator pitch for FIA, Food Industry Asia?
Thanks, John. So, as you said, I'm Matt Kovac. I'm the CEO of Food Industry Asia. We're a regional trade association based in Singapore, and we work with about more than 40 primarily multinational and big Asian corporates across the whole region. So that's South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Greater China. What we do is a lot of the policy and regulatory and capacity building work on behalf of industry and engaging with academia, government, policymakers, NGOs, and civil society. Our focus areas are on health and nutrition. That includes malnutrition, and related to obesity and chronic diseases, and undernutrition as well. Food safety, which is a priority in this part of the world, as well as trade-related issues that could be anything from labeling to halal, and things related to sustainability, but primarily focused on plastics and packaging, and sustainable plastics and packaging, as well as food waste and food loss.
Fantastic. So, from your perspective in working with all of those food companies and with a particular focus on Asia, what are you seeing, what are you hearing as the top issues that the food companies, the globals and the regionals, what are the top issues that they're dealing with, and what type of programs are you putting in place to address those?
Sure. So there are a number of issues that are hitting the industry right now, but I'll prioritize a little bit. I would say, let's take the top three. One would be healthy reformulation. So the market for processed foods is increasing in low and middle income countries, particularly in developing markets in Asia Pacific. So there's a big push by industry to reformulate their product portfolios. This ranges from sweetened beverages to also food and also to food service. There's an absolute necessity for that, and I think companies have really tuned into this, partly because of the obesity and chronic diseases epidemic, and in particular type 2 diabetes, where companies are actually seeing that they need to provide more healthier options, not just from consumer demand, but I think they're trying to get ahead of the game as well. A lot has been said about that consumers want healthier foods, but that's very much in Western markets. It hasn't quite hit Asia Pacific in quite the same way as North America and Europe, but it's getting there. And so I think you'll see that companies from the B2B guys, that's the ingredients players, but also the brands as well, are looking at reformulating where they can, whether that's primarily reducing sugar and also salt and fat, but also looking at how they can include or introduce vitamins, things like fibers, and also proteins, but in a local food culture and context as well. So it's not just taking what they do at a multinational, at an international level, but tailoring some of those foods, those foods that they supply in this part of the region to the market. So that's a big one. And I think that there is demand from consumers, and FIA has actually done a series of research. We've done India, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, and we're doing Indonesia now, to look at what consumers are saying, but also what industry is doing. And that's not exclusively the multinationals, but it's the SMEs as well, and also micro businesses, but primarily looking at what small and medium-sized businesses are doing. There's not as much action within the SMEs, partly because of cost implications and because margins are really thin there. So a lot of this is being driven by the bigger food companies. But if you really want to make difference by making food and certain food categories healthier, you need to bring those SMEs along as well. So how do we get involved with that? We're looking at how we help develop a series of toolkits to support SMEs on that journey, and how they basically link with some of the B2B ingredient suppliers as well, and explain to SMEs what that process is, because many of them don't have a great deal of R&D or regulatory people within their companies. Another aspect of this isn't necessarily driven by FIA, but it's a scheme run by the Singapore government, which is a healthy ingredient scheme, where they provide grants up to about $500,000 Sing dollars to a company to reformulate. That is to improve or reduce, I should say, sugar, salt, and fat, but what else is it that they can put into those products to make them healthier as well? And that's something that we're trying to support the Singapore government with by taking that to other markets, because we hear a lot from the industry, from SMEs saying that they can't afford it. So what can we do to spur and ignite that? So that's clearly a really big focus for us. And I think around 80 to 90% of the SMEs that and the big companies, obviously, that we've surveyed have said that they really want to reformulate, but they need a little bit more support on this. So that's got to be a really big push. And let's be honest, that's partly because processed foods are not going to go away. You know, it's a massive part of people's diets in this, but how are we making those products healthier? A second issue, and I mentioned that in the introduction, is around plastics and packaging. The biggest problem actually is in this part of the world. You take China, you take Indonesia, you take Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, and they're the biggest markets in terms of producing marine and ocean waste. And we see this by the number of plastics and packaging that are entering into rivers and oceans. So FIA has actually embarked on and done a study actually on what are the 30 policy levers that could be implemented in the different markets to try and mitigate that in the first instance. And we're actively working now with the Vietnamese government as well as Indonesia and the Philippines to look at how we put in place some appropriate policies to protect the environment. And the final one is, let's say, food safety. It's a perennial issue, John. You know this very well. It's how are we igniting and spurring more investment into food safety and making consumers more aware of it because of the challenges. You know, the number of, I saw some statistics from the World Bank that said 2 million people die every day, globally that is, but many of the biggest problems are in low middle income markets and that unfortunately is in South Asia, Southeast Asia, out here. So how are we looking at trying to put more investment into making foods more nutritious, but also safe?
Yeah, wonderful. That's a big portfolio, Matt, and a big responsibility. I'm delighted to hear about reformulation, especially in Asia, with reducing sugar, salt, and also fat. Plastics is a massive issue, but I'm intrigued in 30, 45 seconds or so. Can you explain more about the toolkit for SMEs, just very briefly, what that entails and where companies can get more information?
Okay, so what I should say is we're only still developing that right now, and it was based off a template or a toolkit that we produced in the past about how you introduce front of pack labeling for SMEs. So it's sad to say I can't say any more than that because we're developing that both with some experts but also industry on what are the processes and mechanisms. How do we run a series of workshops on the back of that with some of the big ingredients players to basically support SMEs, and then looking at potentially donors and grants and what else can be provided to SMEs to do that. But it will essentially be a very pragmatic steps on how you go about that reformulation journey. And we would probably hopefully work with some market research organizations on consumers as well, because obviously sometimes companies will say, well, where's the consumer demand for it? And in a market like, say, in Indonesia, in Surabaya or in Sulawesi, what's the market for more healthier products? And what does that mean for consumers there? And it's going to be very specific to those certain regions within those countries as well.
Yeah. Gotcha, wonderful, Matt. I'm really happy to hear that you have a focus on consumer sensing, which is critically important. But in the last 30 seconds, Matt, you're up in front of 50 CEOs. They're startups, food startups. What advice would you give them in 30 seconds or less?
In 30 seconds. So what I would say to them is really tune into what some of those consumer trends are, and if you are developing new products and trying to create new markets, then you really need to have to be quite patient. And look at working with the right type of partners. Now that could be a big corporate, it could be getting investment from a VC, or looking at partnering with some other consultancies or other organisations about taking you on that journey. But making sure that you really have the right partners in place to make sure that you have the right type of product for that market in the future.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. And I'd like to thank Matt Kovac so much for his insights today on what's happening with Food Industry Asia and with his members in the region. So Matthew, thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, John. It's good to see you and good to speak to you.
Good to see you, and all the best for continued success with Food Industry Asia. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.